Anglosphere report, breaking analysis. On Thursday night, the President of the United States declassified intelligence documents he said would rewrite one of the most controversial chapters in modern American politics. Within minutes, journalists around the world began reading them. What they found raised a very different question. The President said the documents proved China had illicitly obtained 220 million American voter files, and that intelligence officials had covered it up. But as journalists examined the released intelligence assessments, they found language that appeared to conflict with the President's characterization of what those documents showed. This is not a story about who's right in an argument. It is a story about what the documents actually say. Here's what happened. On the evening of July 16, 2026, President Trump delivered a 25-minute primetime address from the White House East Room. He announced the immediate declassification of intelligence documents, saying, quote, "Newly declassified documents show that over a period of years starting during the 2020 election cycle, the People's Republic of China carried out what is believed to be the largest compromise of election data in history." The figure he gave was 220 million U.S. voter files, names, addresses, phone numbers, party registration, voting history, and, he said, data spanning 18 states. He said China wanted him to lose in 2020 and worked to undermine his campaign, including what he described as an attempt to manufacture illegal ballots. He also said intelligence officials withheld this information from him and from Congress. He directed the Department of Justice, the FBI, and the CIA to investigate and pursue criminal charges. He did not explain how the data was allegedly obtained by China or provide detailed evidence supporting the specific figure of 220 million records. CBS News noted that voter registration data is publicly available in many states, and that access to such data does not by itself demonstrate interference with an election. Now the documents themselves. Hundreds of pages were published to the White House website in 4 groups: vulnerabilities in electronic voting systems, China's acquisition of voter data, a Michigan voter registration investigation, and non-citizens on state voter rolls. Journalists began reading them within the hour. One of the released documents from the Office of the Director of National Intelligence contains this sentence: "We assess that China did not deploy interference efforts and considered, but did not deploy, influence efforts intended to change the outcome of the U.S. presidential election." That assessment was not written by political opponents. It appears within the intelligence material released by the administration itself. CNN's review of the full document set reached a similar conclusion, reporting that none of the declassified information supported the claim that previous election results, including the 2020 presidential election, were manipulated in a way that changed the outcome. Another document released by the CIA concerns allegations surrounding Venezuela's election. CNN notes those claims have been promoted by former Venezuelan intelligence chief Hugo Carvajal, who later pleaded guilty to drug trafficking charges in the United States. That background does not determine whether the allegation is true or false. It provides context for evaluating the source. Where does the figure of 220 million actually come from? Here, the public record is real, but narrower than Thursday night's presentation suggested. A National Intelligence Council assessment completed in April 2020 and later declassified found that Chinese intelligence had analyzed bulk voter registration data from multiple U.S. states. Its stated purpose was public opinion analysis ahead of the 2020 election, a practice the report says China has conducted since at least 2008. The report does not explain how the data was obtained. It does not describe the information as stolen or hacked. In many American states, voter registration information is publicly or commercially available and is routinely purchased by political campaigns. That is a documented, previously known intelligence finding. It is not identical to the broader claim presented during the President's address. CNN also noted that the White House's accompanying materials describe more than 200 million records obtained between 2020 and 2024. A different figure and time frame from the 220 million records beginning in 2020 described during the speech. Now the question of motive. Because this is where the released assessment and the President's speech appear to diverge most clearly. President Trump said China wanted him to lose the 2020 election and worked to undermine his campaign. The U.S. intelligence community examined that question in a formal assessment completed during the final weeks of President Trump's first term. According to the publicly released assessment, China considered, but did not deploy, efforts intended to change the outcome of the election because Beijing judged that neither candidate was worth the risk of being caught interfering. The assessment also states that China did not interfere with election infrastructure, including vote tabulation or the transmission of results. CNBC highlighted that finding as being difficult to reconcile with the president's new allegations regarding manufactured ballots. The assessment did include a minority opinion. One senior intelligence official concluded, with immoderate confidence, that China took limited steps to undermine President Trump's campaign through social media messaging and official statements. However, that official also agreed China did not interfere with election infrastructure or voting systems. According to CNN's review, the same assessment appears again within the documents released Thursday night, which brings us to the cover-up claim. President Trump said this intelligence had been withheld from him. The declassified record indicates the assessment was presented to him in early January 2021 while he was still president. It was also produced by an intelligence community led at the time by officials appointed during his administration. Those facts are part of the public record. They do not, on their own, determine whether additional information exists beyond what has been released. China's response. A spokesperson for the Chinese embassy in Washington said before the speech began, "China has never and will never interfere in the presidential elections of the United States." That statement is consistent with Beijing's long-standing position regarding previous American allegations of election interference. At the same time, President Trump is seeking a meeting with President Xi Jinping later this year over trade. The diplomatic outreach and Thursday night's accusations now exist side by side. Why the world is watching. This story reaches far beyond the United States. If election security intelligence again becomes central to American politics, the other members of the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand, may also face renewed scrutiny over intelligence sharing, cybersecurity cooperation, and election resilience. Every Five Eyes democracy conducts elections of its own. Each relies in part on shared intelligence concerning foreign cyber threats. For intelligence professionals, confidence depends not only on classified information, but also on confidence that those assessments will be interpreted consistently when they enter public debate. Across the wider Indo-Pacific, the timing adds another layer to an already complex strategic relationship between Washington and Beijing. Why now? Reuters reported that the speech came roughly 4 months before the U.S. midterm elections, at a time when Republicans are defending congressional majorities amid political pressure over the economy and the Iran conflict. President Trump has urged Congress to pass new voter identification and citizenship verification legislation. Federal studies over many years have generally concluded that proven cases of voter fraud remain uncommon. Senate Majority Leader John Thune, asked beforehand whether President Trump should revisit the 2020 election, replied, "We are focused on the 2026 election." A carefully worded response that drew attention across Washington. The Sceptic's challenge. Could the documents contain genuine new information beyond the issues discussed here? Yes. Several sections concerning voting systems and voter rolls remain separate from the specific question of China's intentions. Could the minority intelligence opinion ultimately prove more accurate than the majority assessment? That remains possible. The disagreement was real. But every version of the assessment still concluded that China did not interfere with election infrastructure. And finally, does a contradiction between a public statement and an intelligence assessment automatically prove either one is correct? No. It simply means the evidence released so far does not fully support every claim made during Thursday night's address. Those are different questions. This report treats them separately. What we know. Verified. President Trump's address took place on July 16, 2026, publicly documented. American intelligence concluded in 2021 that China considered but did not deploy efforts intended to change the outcome of the election. Verified. That assessment appears within the newly released documents, according to multiple independent reviews. Unknown. The precise sourcing, methodology, and scale behind the reported figure of 220 million voter records, whether further investigations produce additional evidence, and whether other sections of the release ultimately change the broader picture. China's interest in American voter registration data is documented. The broader allegations made Thursday night remain the subject of continuing scrutiny. The released documents have now become part of that story. Governments release documents. Politicians make claims. Analysts reach different conclusions. But in a democracy, the public deserves something more than competing narratives. It deserves evidence, and the opportunity to examine that evidence for itself. Whether these documents settle the debate or deepen it will depend on what comes next. Further declassifications, independent investigations, or evidence that has yet to emerge. For now, one thing is clear. The released documents have become part of the story. I'm the Anglosphere Report, connecting the stories shaping the Anglosphere in the world.